When my wife and I bought our first house in the suburbs, I remember feeling like we had finally made it. After years of living in a cramped city apartment with our 3 kids, the space, the quiet, and the feeling of safety were everything we had hoped for. The neighbors told us it was the kind of area where you could leave your doors unlocked and never worry. Looking back, I really wish that had been true. The house wasn't massive, but it was comfortable. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a big kitchen, and a backyard that my wife fell in love with instantly. It had an old stone patio and a garden that looked like it belonged in some forgotten fairy tale. There were vines climbing the fence, tall trees hanging low over the grass, and these strange weathered stone statues scattered around the yard. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them. Angels, cherubs, a dog, even one that looked like a little girl holding a basket. They were all old, cracked, moss-covered, and pale gray from decades of rain and sunlight. I thought they were a little creepy, but my wife said they gave the place character, so I left them there. It meant less work for me, and honestly, I just wanted to make her happy. About 3 days after moving in, I was standing by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, looking out at the garden. Something seemed off. One of the statues, an angel with folded wings, was facing away from the house. The rest all faced toward the windows, almost like they were watching us. But this one had its back turned. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I remembered it wrong, or maybe the movers had nudged it when they were bringing things through the yard. But the next morning, another statue had turned around too. That time I was sure. I asked my wife if she'd been outside moving them, and she looked at me like I was joking. Why would I move them? Those things weigh a ton. She was right, they did. Even the smaller ones were solid stone, not the hollow kind you find at garden stores. Figured maybe it was one of the kids. My oldest son, Jimmy, was a prankster, always trying to spook his little sisters. But when I asked, he swore he hadn't touched them, even looked kind of creeped out when I mentioned it. A few more days went by with nothing weird happening. I started to relax. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. New house, new noises, new environment. Then one evening, right around sunset, I looked out that same kitchen window and froze. All of the statues, every single one, had been moved. They were now standing in a straight line along the edge of the patio, facing the back of the house. Their pale faces were turned toward the windows, their blank eyes reflecting the fading light. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. But no, they were there. And something about the way they were arranged. It didn't feel random. My wife came into the kitchen and saw the look on my face before she even looked outside. When she did, she went pale. She whispered, "Who would do that?" We went outside together to check. It was still light out and the air smelled like rain. I tried to move one of the statues, the angel, but it didn't even budge. I pushed with both hands and couldn't get it to move an inch. That's when my stomach sank. If I couldn't move it alone, who could have moved all 7? And why? We called the police that night. They came, looked around, and basically told us it was probably a prank, maybe neighborhood kids. They suggested installing security cameras. We said we would, though honestly, at that time, we couldn't afford it. After that, things were quiet for about a week. We convinced ourselves it was over. I stopped checking the windows as often. The kids started playing in the yard again. Life started feeling normal. Until that Saturday morning, when I went outside with my coffee, the first thing I saw was a message spray painted across the back wall of our house, in huge black letters that said, "Go away." It felt like ice water poured down my spine. I grabbed the kids and pulled them inside, yelling for my wife to lock the doors. I don't even remember setting my mug down. I just remember my hands shaking, the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. The cops came again, took another report, said the same thing. Probably local teenagers. They said they'd keep a car nearby for the night, but we both knew that didn't mean much. That night, we barely slept. Every sound made us jump, every creak in the floorboards, every rustle outside. Sometime after midnight, my wife let out a scream that nearly stopped my heart. She was staring out the living room window, pointing toward the garden. There were people out there, 5 of them all, wearing white masks, standing in the yard among the statues. They weren't moving, just standing there perfectly still. Then, without warning, they started dancing. Not like normal dancing, it was this jerky, unnatural movement, like puppets being yanked by invisible strings. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we owned and told my wife to call the police. When I stepped outside and yelled, they stopped. Now 5 heads turned toward me at once. I took one step forward. They scattered, running into the dark corners of the garden until they disappeared behind the trees. By the time the police arrived, they were gone. That night, my wife cried for hours. The kids didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with that same knife on the table in front of me until sunrise. The next morning, I drove straight to a hardware store and bought a full security camera set. I didn't care if it put me into debt. I wasn't letting anyone get that close to my family again.
Weeks passed, and nothing happened. No messages, no masked figures. The statues stayed exactly where they were. Eventually, we started to breathe again. But every time I looked at those statues, I got that same cold feeling in my gut. It's been years now.
We never got an explanation. The police never found anyone. We still live in that house, though. Sometimes I wish we didn't. And every once in a while, when I look out that kitchen window, I could swear one of those statues is turned ever so slightly. It's just enough that it's facing the house again. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever experienced something you can't explain, let me know in the comments below. And my wife, Taylor, and I moved to New Mexico about 4 months ago. We were looking for something quiet, far from the city noise, and even farther from our family, who always seemed to find a way into our business. We found this decent-sized house out in the country, surrounded by dry fields and red sand. The price was suspiciously good, but the place checked out. It had a big kitchen, 2 floors, and even a basement, which is a rare find around here. It felt perfect, and for a little while it really was. But about a month in, things started to get weird. I began noticing the lights upstairs flickering at random. Sometimes the breaker would trip, but only for the upstairs circuit. Now, I'm an electrician by trade, so I wasn't too worried. I just figured it was a load imbalance, an easy fix for someone like me. One afternoon, I finally went down to the basement to check the main panel. I hadn't spent much time down there since we moved in. It was dark, musty, and cluttered, more like a storage cave than a usable space. You know the type. Old chairs, dusty boxes, a few broken shelves. It was the kind of place where the air just feels heavier the longer you stand still. After about 10 minutes, I found the issue and made a mental note to rewire it when I had some free time. But before heading back upstairs, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to look around a little more, and that's when I saw it. In the far corner of the basement, half hidden behind a stack of old wooden chairs, was a large metal door. This didn't look like any regular basement door. This thing was thick, industrial-looking, and taller than usual, like something you'd see in a vault or a storm shelter. And the edges were sealed tight, and there was this heavy handle in the center, rusted from age. I walked up to it and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked solid. I figured maybe the previous owners had used it for storage or as a tornado room, but still. Why wouldn't TU mention a locked room in the basement when you're reselling the house? That's not something you just forget about. I went upstairs, grabbed the drawer full of leftover keys the realtor had given us, and tried every single one. Nothing fit. After about 15 keys, I gave up. When I told Taylor about it, she just laughed and said I was overthinking things. It's probably just a shelter, she said. You're acting like you found buried treasure or something. But that door just stayed on my mind. Every time I went into the basement, it felt like it was staring back at me, silent, heavy, and hiding something. A week later, Taylor managed to get in touch with the house's previous owners through our realtor. I was sitting right next to her when she made the call. The conversation started out normal enough, but when Taylor brought up the door, there was this long pause. Way too long. Finally, the woman on the phone said, "Oh, that old thing. It's just a storm room. We lost the key years ago. Best to just ignore it." But there was something in her tone that just made my skin crawl, like she was forcing herself to sound casual. Her husband didn't say a single word the whole time. When Taylor hung up, we just stared at each other. I could tell she was trying to brush it off. But there was a definite tension in her voice when she said, "Let's just forget about it," but I couldn't. Over the next few weeks, I found myself standing down there more often than I'd like to admit, just staring at that door. I even tried picking the lock, using a few tricks I'd learned over the years. It was no use. Whoever built this thing had not wanted anyone getting in. Finally, after enough nagging from me, Taylor agreed to let me hire a locksmith. He came over to mornings Latira, a guy named Brian. He looked like he'd been cracking safes his whole life. When he saw the door, he just whistled. "Man," he said, "that's not standard. That's a serious lock." It took him nearly an hour to get it open. The second the latch clicked, I felt this strange pit in my stomach, that primal sense of asterisk, don't open that asterisk. But it was too late. When the door swung open, the smell hit us first. It was stale, damp air mixed with something faintly rotten. Inside was a small, concrete room, maybe 10 feet wide, and the walls. The walls were covered in old black and white photographs, hundreds of them. Faces of people I didn't recognize, some smiling, others frowning. All of them marked over with these strange symbols in what looked like charcoal or ash. Circles, triangles, slashes through their eyes. In the center of the room sat a single wooden chair facing the wall, and next to it was an old cot with a blanket and a pile of empty chip bags and water bottles. This wasn't just a room. Someone had been living down there. Recently I called for Brian, but he was already backing up the stairs, shaking his head. He muttered something about bad energy and told me he'd seen some weird stuff in his job, but nothing like this. He left without even taking his payment. Taylor came down a few minutes later. The second she saw the cot, her face went pale. We both knew what it meant. Someone had been staying there, hiding in the one part of our house we couldn't access. And then I noticed something else. At the back of the room, half covered in shadow, was another door. Smaller, metal again. I opened it slowly and saw a narrow set of stairs leading up to another exit, a cellar door that opened to the backyard. One we had never once used or even checked. That's when it all hit me. Whoever was living here had been using that door to sneak in and out, maybe while we slept. I ran upstairs and checked the lock on the cellar door from the outside. It wasn't even latched. I called the police immediately. They came, searched the room, took pictures, wrote up a report. They said it looked like someone had been squatting there, maybe before we moved in. But the photos, the symbols, that wasn't normal. The officer told us they'd reach out to the previous owners for questioning. When they tried calling, the number was disconnected. That night, I barricaded the cellar door with a heavy dresser and chained it shut. I barely slept. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps right below us. Around 2 a.m., Taylor shook me awake. There was a sound downstairs, loud and metallic. I grabbed a flashlight and my baseball bat and went to check. The sound came again, a loud bang against the front door, hard enough to make the hinges rattle. Lola, our dog, just went crazy barking. Then it stopped. We stood there, listening. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the banging. Just when I thought it was over, something small hit our bedroom window, a tapping sound. Then another, and another. Someone was throwing rocks. I pulled back the curtain, ready to catch whoever it was, but all I saw was darkness. No movement, no sound. 5 minutes later, the sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. I ran downstairs just in time to see two figures in dark clothes running away from the house. They disappeared into the field beyond the fence before I could even react. The kitchen window was shattered. They'd tried to get in. I called the police again, shaking so bad I could barely dial the number. When they arrived, they found footprints in the dirt outside the cellar door, fresh ones. But the lock was still in place. Whoever it was had tried and failed to get in that way first. The officers told us they'd keep a patrol near our road for the next few nights. It was 2 days ago. They haven't been back, at least not that we've seen. But I can't shake this feeling that they're still out there. Watching? Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear faint noises coming from below, a tap against the concrete, the creak of metal. And every morning I check that cellar door. Every morning the dust looks slightly disturbed, like someone was there and left before sunrise. Thanks for listening to my story. Hey, if you've ever experienced something like this, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. When I was 27, I bought my first house. It was a huge milestone for me. After years of sharing a crowded space with my parents and 3 siblings, I was finally on my own. The house itself wasn't anything spectacular, just a simple 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath place with a small fenced-in backyard. But it was all mine, and that's what mattered. The thing I was most excited about, believe it or not, was the quiet. No more early morning arguments, no barking dogs, no constant footsteps, just peace. Or so I thought. It turns out silence can be a pretty loud noise all on its own. The first few weeks felt surreal. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to complete stillness, and instead of feeling peaceful, it felt unsettling. The house was just so empty. The absence of noise was almost deafening. It was a strange kind of loneliness I hadn't anticipated. My favorite part of the house was a tiny balcony off the master bedroom. It was barely big enough to stand on, but it quickly became my personal sanctuary. Every evening, after a long day at work, I'd step out there, have a smoke, and just watch the neighborhood settle down for the night. It was your classic suburban street, with houses packed tightly together. Even with the tall fences, you could easily see into your neighbor's yard from a second-story window. From my little perch, I had a perfect view into the backyard of the house directly behind mine. For the first few weeks, I didn't give it much thought. I was busy getting to know everyone on the block, introducing myself, being the friendly new guy. But I soon realized I had met almost everyone, except for the person living in that house. And the more I noticed, the weirder it seemed. The house always looked dark and neglected. The grass in the backyard was a jungle. The paint on the fence was peeling, and the windows were almost always dark. The only sign of life was a single light in an upstairs bedroom that would flicker on for a few hours some nights, then go out. After about a month of this, my curiosity got the best of me. I mean, who was this mystery neighbor? One Saturday afternoon, I decided to just go for it. I walked around the block to the front of the house to introduce myself. Up close, the place looked even more rundown. Weeds were choking the front yard, and the paint was so cracked it looked like a dried-up riverbed. I tried the doorbell, but it was dead, so I knocked. I waited. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Nothing. I was just about to turn around and head home when I saw a tiny flicker of movement behind one of the front curtains. Just a peek. Someone was definitely home. Before I could even process that, the front door swung open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall. And there she was. An elderly woman, short and incredibly thin, with her gray hair pulled back into a severe, tight bun. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her expression was what stopped me in my tracks. It was stretched, tense, like her skin was 2 sizes too small for her bones. And her eyes, they were wide, glassy, and they locked onto me without a single blink. I just stood there, completely frozen. She didn't say a word, just stared. The silence was so heavy it felt like I could touch it. Finally, I managed to break it, awkwardly stammering, "Hi, I'm your new neighbor. I live right behind you." Her expression didn't soften. It didn't change at all. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice soft and shaky. "My name is Priscilla." That was it. No nice to meet you, no welcome to the neighborhood, just her name. Tried to recover, forcing a polite smile. "Well, if you ever need anything," but she cut me off by closing the door right in my face. No goodbye, no nod, nothing. I walked back home feeling deeply uneasy. It wasn't just that she was rude. It was the way she looked at me. It was a look of intense focus, almost like she was trying to place my face, trying to remember something or someone. It was just plain weird. That night, I went out onto my balcony for my usual routine. As I lit my cigarette, I glanced over at her yard and my heart jumped into my throat. She was there, standing stock still in the center of her overgrown lawn, staring directly up at my window. First, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It was dark, and the faint light from her back porch cast long, creepy shadows across her face. But she wasn't moving, not a single inch, just standing there, watching me. I stood frozen on my balcony, the cigarette burning forgotten between my fingers. After a couple of minutes of this silent standoff, I backed away slowly into my bedroom, trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just confused. Maybe she was lonely. Yeah, that had to be it. The next night, I hesitated before going out onto the balcony, but I forced myself to. I wasn't going to let a strange old woman make me a prisoner in my own home. I stepped out, deliberately not looking in her direction, but I couldn't resist. I glanced over. This time she wasn't in the yard. She was inside her house, moving from one window to another on the second floor. At each window, she would pull the curtain aside, peer out at me for a moment, and then move to the next. It was so methodical, so deliberate. It felt like she wanted me to know she was watching me. My skin crawled. I tried to act casual, finishing my smoke as if nothing was wrong, but my hands were shaking. I told my dad about it the next day, hoping he'd have some logical explanation. He just said she probably had dementia or was just a lonely old woman who did understand social boundaries. He told me I should feel sorry for her, so I tried. I really did. For the next few days, things were quiet. I didn't see her at all, No lights, no movement, nothing. I started to relax, thinking maybe the weirdness was over. And then one morning, I went into my backyard and saw something lying on the grass by my side of the fence. It was a single woman's sock. Old, white, and dirty. Definitely wasn't mine. There was no logical way for it to have gotten there unless someone had come over the fence into my yard. That's when my pity for her evaporated and was replaced by genuine fear. I thought about calling the police, but what could I even say? "Hi, officer. My elderly neighbor might have dropped her sock in my yard." It sounded ridiculous. So I just grabbed a stick, picked up the sock and threw it in the trash, trying to forget about it. That night, things went from creepy to terrifying. It was around 1:30 in the morning when I was jolted awake by the sound of my doorbell. It wasn't just a single ring. It was ringing over and over and over. Rapid fire, aggressive, nonstop. My heart was pounding, but I didn't even have to guess who it was. I knew. I stumbled out of bed, a mix of anger and exhaustion washing over me. I was going to open that door and tell her to leave me alone once and for all. I flung the door open, ready to yell. But before a single word could come out of my mouth, she lunged at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure rage and heartbreaking grief. She was screaming, but the words were slurred and nonsensical. "You took him. You took my son," she shrieked, over and over again. And that's when I saw it. In her hand, she was holding a kitchen knife. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed her wrist just before she could swing the knife, twisted it hard, and the blade clattered onto my porch. I shoved her back, away from the doorway, and managed to pin her to the ground. She was shockingly strong for her size, flailing and kicking and trying to bite me like a cornered animal. The whole time, she just kept screaming about her son, screaming that he used to live here. I yelled at her to stop, to calm down, but it was like she couldn't even hear me. Her eyes were wild, unfocused, and filled with a terrifying, raw hatred. Somehow, I managed to get my phone out of my pocket with one hand, while using my knee to hold her down. I dialed 911. The 5 minutes it took for the police to arrive felt like the longest, most horrifying 5 minutes of my entire life. Her screaming turned into these awful, guttural sobs, which then morphed into manic laughter, and then back to screaming again. When the police finally burst onto the scene, they had to physically pry her off of me. She even tried to bite one of the officers, still yelling that I was the one who stole her boy. They cuffed her and dragged her out to their car, her screams echoing down the quiet street until they finally got her into the back of the cruiser. And then silence. The kind of silence I used to crave, but now it just felt heavy and sinister. An officer stayed behind to talk to me. He explained that Priscilla would be taken for a psychiatric evaluation and that she had a known history of these episodes. He told me she'd lived in that house for decades, that her son had passed away there in that house when he was about my age. The officer didn't say how he died, only that Priscilla had never been the same since. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye made me jump. I felt like she was still out there, somewhere in the dark, watching me. A few weeks later, I saw a moving truck parked in front of her house. Relatives had come to clear the place out. I watched from my window as they carried out old furniture, boxes, and a few framed photos. One of the photo frames fell face down on the driveway. Later that day, as I walked by, my curiosity got the better of me again. I picked it up. It was a picture of her son. He was smiling, probably in his mid-20s, standing proudly in front of their house. And there, in the background, faintly visible through the slats of the fence, was the unmistakable outline of my balcony. It hit me like a ton of bricks. She hadn't mistaken me for a stranger who looked like him. In her broken mind, she thought an asterisk was asterisk him, returned. I moved out 6 months after that. I couldn't stay. I still live alone now, but things are different. I keep my curtains closed tight every single night. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and I close my eyes, I can still hear it, that frantic, desperate ringing of the doorbell over and over again, just before I opened it to a nightmare. Thanks so much for listening to my story. If you have a creepy story of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And if you want to hear more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay safe out there.